everybody. Welcome back. I'm Taylor, and today we are going to be doing a Season 1 review to Netflix's Archive 81. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're at it, go ahead and also hit that notification bell so you never miss a video here on Critical Commentary. Did you do it? You sure? Pinky swear? Okay. As you can see from the title, this is going to be a why you should be watching styled video. I decided to do this because I saw on Rotten Tomatoes that this series was kind of low in the audience score, and even the critics didn't particularly find anything significant about it, despite the fact that this is probably a new Netflix classic in horror, but also in sci-fi and mystery noir. When this show came up on my recommended list, I'm not gonna lie, I definitely hesitated watching it. The trailer didn't really stick out to me. If anything, I found it to be a bit, cliche in the fact that it was a show about a man that somehow becomes obsessed with this woman. And that was kind of all I saw in the trailer, or that's all I interpreted from the trailer. But then I watched the first episode, and I don't know, it just spoke to me. There were so many things that I really found to be just captivating from this show. I'd like to throw in this disclaimer before we get into it. If you've never seen a video of mine, the why you should be watching it styled videos are mostly just a format for both people who have seen it and people who have not. For those who have not, I will be getting into some spoilers, but I promise you they'll be mostly out of context. They'll be more tied into the themes and symbolism that I noticed in the series. And if you have seen it, hopefully it'll be a little bit more of a deep dive on what I saw. So this is your one and only warning. To give a brief synopsis of this series, Archive 81 is a show based off of a podcast that centers around a archivist named Dan Turner. Dan Turner is hired by a mysterious Mr. Davenport to stay at his compound in upstate New York while restoring some collection filled with cassette tapes that Mr. Davenport just so happens to have for research and legal purposes. While Dan is staying in this compound and working on these tapes, he becomes extremely entangled with the subject, who is this doctoral candidate student named Melody Pendress. Melody Pendress is doing an anthropological dissertation on this Cecil-styled apartment building called the Visser, and its many inhabitants. But what she doesn't know is that these inhabitants, these residents of the building and the Visser itself, have a dark past, one that also ends up dragging Dan into its mysteries. If you asked me how I felt about this series, I would have to say, short answer, I thought that this is a burgeoning masterpiece. Horror in Netflix right now is kind of being dominated by Mike Flanagan if we were to talk about upcoming horror royalty. Even though the showrunner is someone that I am particularly not familiar with, her name is Rebecca Sonnenschein, I am very familiar with the works of James Wan, who is the executive producer of this series, or a executive producer of the series. So I was pretty confident, but then I also wasn't really confident because I felt like with how the Conjuring universe has just imploded, that, would this be as good as some of his older stuff and even like Insidious and Saw and The Invisible Man by Lee Whannell, which was one of his original partners. It is. It definitely is. What I liked the most about Archive 81 was how it was able to just delicately balance between paying homage to old and classical archetypes and tropes of horror while still subverting them to better encompass a modern audience. Now, I will say this, I haven't listened to the podcast, I've only seen the series, but I'm going to tell you, even though I've been told that it doesn't totally fit, the show definitely branches off from the podcast, I definitely want to start listening to it because the style of the show gives me vibes of Welcome to Night Vale, and I think that's something I'd be interested in. I also listen to Spirits on Multitudes podcast, so I feel like having those two ideas together would be a pretty amazing car ride experience. I'm sorry, I had to switch back over. I could not keep doing those earbuds. They were just really bothering me. Archive 81 is able to do that dance of equilibrium so well because the story is centered around two main characters whose lives are somewhat intertwined but also separated by different decades. And with these decades comes different rules in horror that are, I guess, to some degree, paying homage to and subverting. On the 1994 side, we get Melody, who is the traditional female archetype of whatever you want to call it, the last girl, the chosen one. She's the hot girl that gets tortured by the satanic cult. This character tends to be mostly female and white. I got vibes of Suspiria when I saw her parts. I felt like I was seeing a little bit of Rosemary's Baby, Twilight Zone. I felt like what we were seeing there was the more traditional horror, the kind of calculating and predictable side of horror. With Dan, I found his character to be quite significant because aside from Jordan Peele and Nia DaCosta's works that do center around Black protagonists in horror, I haven't really seen too many Black men be at the center of a story like this. So I found his part of the story to be just as equally compelling because he comes from a traumatic background, but not because he's from the hood, not because he's got some like stereotypical, non-Black writers trying to write Black characters, cliche. Dan is intelligent, and not just with technology, but he's emotionally intelligent. His empathy levels are just so significant, and it's great to see because I don't think you get to see a lot of strong male protagonists in horror movies to be also sweet and soft. He doesn't portray himself in the traditional male fashion. He is a softie, and he's loving, and he's closed off, and he's guarded, and there's just so much going on with him as a person that you just find yourself falling in love with him, and you want to see what happens because you want him to succeed. You don't want him to just be cannon fodder for the baddie. This show's got interdimensional travel. It's got a demonic cult. It's got art used as portals. It even has mold. Why'd you say it like that? It even has mold. Heck, it even has a sketchy DNA testing conglomerate. I see you, 23andMe. It's got all of the ingredients for a perfect horror story. But what makes it so much better than a horror story is because it actually gets into parapsychology and, how the paranormal is kind of tied to predetermined science. There's so much to unpack with this show. And you could honestly just look at it face value and say that this show was just good. You could say, there's no significance to it. It's just a good show and it kept me entertained. You could go with that. But you could also say that there's a real dialogue being started with this show as well. I would love for James Wan to find a home in streaming, especially if we're going to get more things like this. I know that on the negative side, when you have these bigger mainstream names making stuff, or at least putting their name on stuff, it kind of overshadows the new talent. And I'm aware. And I think that by having him as an executive producer in this series, but not actually doing any directing, was a very, very smart move, because you see the name on there, so you assume that it's going to be a little bit better than you were hoping. But it also was really, really on the showrunner. If the showrunner knows what they're doing, then it's a good show. And I really think that Rebecca Sonnenschein really did that. And I loved this show. I know that right now, because the podcast is in season 3, I believe. Yeah, the podcast is in season 3 right now. And apparently, they've been talking on Twitter that this show coming out has actually brought a bigger audience to their podcast as a result. That it's kind of implied, and the way that it ends, it's implied that there's going to be a second season. I'm curious to know what that would look like. It ends in a very interesting way, and I really want to get into the podcast because I want to see where it deviates. But I do think that at the end of the day, this was probably so far my favorite thing of 2022. I really enjoyed it. I would love to know what you guys think. So please, if you've seen it, make sure to mark, spoilers down below in the comments, but please tell me what you thought about it. Tell me if there were some things that I maybe missed that you noticed and you want to bring to my attention. If you haven't seen it, let me know if I've piqued your interest, and if you really want to check out Archive 81. But before I go, I just want to let you guys know to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at CriticalCom with 2M's TV. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Bye, guys.